The silence between them. The dressing room door closed gently behind her with a final click, as if the walls themselves respected the weight of the silence Sandra Bullock carried inside her chest. Outside, applause roared like a wave crashing on the beach, the kind of applause that used to fill her with adrenaline, pride, joy. But tonight, all it stirred was the ache in her throat she'd been holding back for hours. She stood for a moment, eyes on her reflection. Not the one in the lit mirror in front of her, but the deeper one, the version of herself staring through her own gaze. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached up to unpin the delicate clip holding back her hair. Her skin shimmered beneath the lights, flawless, perfect, as the public always demanded. But underneath it all was a woman breaking in slow motion. Somewhere in that thunder of applause, she knew Keanu was clapping too. Maybe he was even standing, that respectful, silent support of his, the kind that said everything without saying a word. But she couldn't face him. Not yet. Not now. Not after everything that had just unfolded backstage. Hours earlier, everything had been different. The event was meant to be a reunion, a celebration, a tribute to their years on screen, their chemistry, their iconic roles, and the decades of admiration they had earned from fans around the world. A Netflix-produced retrospective, a red carpet, a stage, clips from their movies, and a final live interview in front of a massive crowd. It was supposed to be magic, until it became something else entirely. Keanu had arrived first, dressed in his usual timeless elegance, black suit, no tie, hair falling slightly across his forehead. The crew greeted him like a returning hero, and yet his eyes kept drifting toward the empty hallway, waiting for her. She had been quiet lately, distant in messages, short on calls. He knew something was wrong, but as always, he didn't push. Sandra, on the other hand, had rehearsed every possible version of what she might say tonight, but none of it felt right anymore. And the one thing she needed to say most, she still hadn't found the courage to whisper. As the clock ticked toward the start of the event, Alexandra, the young assistant director assigned to manage the talent backstage, noticed something unusual in the air. She'd seen many celebrities before, but this was different. The energy between Sandra and Keanu was heavy, as though history weighed in every glance they avoided. From the wings, Alexandra watched Sandra smile politely at fans, answer questions for the cameras, and stand beside Keanu for pictures, but when the flashes ended, so did the illusion. Sandra would always take one step back, one breath away, and Keanu, ever the gentleman, never crossed the invisible line she had drawn between them. Alexandra didn't understand it, not yet. But then in the final interview, something happened that no one expected. The host, a charming man with a reputation for digging deep, decided to go off script. "Sandra," he said with a disarming smile, "after all these years, is there anything you've never told Keanu that you wish you had?" The room hushed. 1,000 cameras zoomed in. Even the spotlight seemed to lean forward. Keanu turned slightly toward her, his expression unreadable, and Sandra just froze, the seconds stretched. Her lips parted, her eyes softened, but she said nothing. The silence spoke volumes. The host, sensing the tension, chuckled and waved it off. "We'll save that for the memoir, huh?" The audience laughed, but not Keanu, and not Sandra, because in that moment everything they had both left unsaid now hung between them like a truth neither was ready to face. Backstage afterward, Sandra slipped away quietly, retreating to her dressing room before anyone could stop her. Keanu watched her go but didn't follow, not immediately. Instead, he stood alone in the corridor, his fingers pressing lightly into his palm, an old habit from his theater days when nerves threatened to betray emotion. Alexandra, still stunned by the moment she had just witnessed, approached Keanu gently. "Do you want me to go check on her?" she asked softly. He looked at her for a long second, then shook his head. "She'll come to me," he said, "if she's ready." Inside the dressing room, Sandra paced. She had to say goodbye. But how do you say goodbye to the only person who ever truly understood the silence in your soul? She sat down slowly, pulling out the folded piece of paper she had written weeks ago. A letter. One she had rewritten 10 times, never finding the courage to give. Her fingers clutched the page like a lifeline, and for the first time in years, tears rolled freely down her cheeks. It wasn't a goodbye born of bitterness. It was something much heavier. A goodbye born of love too deep to carry anymore. Just as she folded the letter again, a knock came, gentle, not rushed. One knock, a pause, then a second. She didn't answer, but he opened the door anyway. Keanu stepped inside, eyes soft, body still. He didn't speak, just stood there, allowing the moment to breathe. Sandra turned slowly, wiping her cheeks. "You shouldn't have come in," she whispered. "You left the door unlocked," he replied, the corners of his mouth lifting gently. "That's not like you." She gave a sad chuckle, her voice catching. "Nothing's like me anymore." Keanu took one step forward, then paused. "So talk to me." "I can't," she said quickly, looking away, "because if I talk, I won't leave." He sat on the edge of the chair near her, still not closing the distance. "Then don't," he said. "Stay." Sandra's breath hitched. "You don't understand, Keanu. There's something I've been keeping from you, something I've been keeping from everyone. She paused, struggling to continue. Her hand slowly extended the letter toward him. "This says it better than I ever could." Keanu hesitated, then reached out, gently taking it. But before he could open it, Sandra reached forward again, stopping him. "Please don't read it yet, not until I'm gone." Their eyes locked, time stood still, and then slowly Keanu nodded. She stood, her frame shook slightly, but she was determined not to collapse, not here, not in front of him. "Promise me one thing," she said, "anything. When you read it, remember that I never lied, I just didn't know how to say the truth without breaking everything." Keanu rose as well, the letter now folded in his hand, held close to his chest like something sacred. "Sandra, what if I already know what it says?" Her eyes filled again. "Then you know why I can't stay." And then, without another word, she turned and walked past him, past the lights, past the applause that still echoed faintly outside, past Alexandra, who stood frozen in the hallway, watching the woman she admired disappear down the stairs with nothing but her silence as armor. Keanu didn't move. He just stood there alone in the doorway. He looked down at the letter once more, but didn't unfold it, not yet. Because some truths deserve a moment of silence. The letter that waited in silence. Keanu stood motionless long after Sandra had disappeared. The hall around him was quiet now, emptied of fans, crew, and the buzzing chatter of the event. It was as though time itself had halted in that corridor, holding its breath along with him. In his hand, the letter weighed heavier than any script he had ever held, heavier than any award he had ever lifted. It wasn't paper, it was everything unsaid, everything hidden, everything real. He didn't need to unfold it to feel the truth vibrating through its creases. But still, he didn't open it, not yet. Because reading it would mean accepting that she was truly gone, and part of him still believed or maybe hoped that she'd turn around, that she'd forgotten something, that she'd walk back into the room just to say one more thing. But the echo of her heels had faded into the kind of silence that doesn't get interrupted. Not by noise, not by footsteps, not even by time. Alexandra lingered at the far end of the hall, uncertain whether to approach. She had never seen Keanu look like this, not during shoots, not in quiet moments between scenes, not even in the emotionally charged interviews he was famous for navigating with quiet grace. There was a stillness about him now, but it wasn't peace. It was restraint, the kind of restraint that comes from holding back 1,000 feelings at once. She took a step forward, then stopped. This wasn't her place. And yet, something about what she had witnessed, about the way Sandra had looked at Keanu without saying what her eyes screamed, told her that maybe it was her place, not as a colleague, but as someone human enough to understand what unspoken love looked like when it trembled on the edge of goodbye. Hours passed, the crew wrapped up, the lights dimmed, the auditorium emptied, but Keanu remained backstage, sitting alone in the darkened dressing room with the letter on the table in front of him, untouched. His fingers toyed with the edges, brushing the folded paper with reverence as though opening it without permission might shatter something sacred. Outside, the city moved on. Cameras packed up, autographs faded. But inside that small room, the weight of decades pressed on his chest. Years of friendship, of laughter, of missed chances and delayed confessions, of long drives after wrap-ups and the quiet warmth of being understood without asking to be. He had loved Sandra in a way the world never knew, not with flashy headlines or red carpet romance, but in the quiet sacrifices, in staying when she cried and stepping back when she needed space. He had held her grief when she lost her parents, guarded her dignity when tabloids circled like vultures, and respected every wall she built between her heart and the world. He never climbed those walls. He waited outside, knowing if she ever opened the door, it wouldn't be for someone who pushed. It would be for someone who stayed, but now she had walked away and left behind a letter instead of a door. It wasn't until midnight that he finally picked it up, not to read it, just to feel it in his hands, and as he held it, his phone buzzed, a soft vibration that felt intrusive in the hush of the room. He almost ignored it, but then the name flashed on the screen. "Alexandra." He answered, his voice hoarse, quiet. "Yes." There was hesitation on the other end then. "Mr. Reeves, I know it's not my place, but I just saw her at the valet. She's crying in the back of a cab. She tried to hide it, but I don't think she wants to go." Keanu closed his eyes, pressing the letter to his chest. "Sometimes," he said softly, "wanting to stay isn't enough." There was silence on the line, and then Alexandra's voice, barely above a whisper. "Then what is?" Keanu didn't answer, because he didn't know, not anymore. The next morning, Sandra sat alone on the porch of the beach house she had rented in Malibu. The ocean was angry today, waves slamming into the shore as if the sea itself resented her leaving. She hadn't slept. The bags under her eyes weren't just from fatigue, but from the weight of pretending she was at peace with her decision. The moment she handed Keanu that letter, something in her fractured. She had told herself it was the right thing, to spare him the burden of her truth, to leave him with dignity intact, memories untainted, and the career they both cherished preserved. But in doing so, she had betrayed her own heart. Every minute away from him now throbbed like a wound she couldn't stitch closed. She held her phone in her hand, thumb hovering over his name, but she couldn't press it, couldn't undo what had already been done. She imagined him opening the letter, imagined his face as he read it, as he read the truth about her diagnosis. The one she had kept hidden from the world, from the press, from even her closest friends. The early-stage cancer. The prognosis not grim, but uncertain. The treatments beginning next month. The doctor's words echoing in her ears even now. It's manageable, but you'll need to rest. You'll need peace, and you'll need to put yourself first. She hadn't done that in decades. She didn't even know what peace looked like. But she knew it couldn't involve hurting Keanu, not by dragging him into hospital rooms, into days of pain and recovery, into uncertainty. So she left. Because the only thing harder than facing illness was watching someone you love suffer through it with you. She tried to tell herself he'd be better off without her, that their bond had run its course, that he'd forget. But the lie didn't hold. Not when she remembered the way he looked at her backstage. Not when she remembered the way he didn't follow her out of respect, not indifference. That was always his way, giving space, even when it tore him in half. And now she didn't know if she'd ever get that space back. Keanu finally opened the letter at dawn. He sat on the edge of his bed, the city still asleep behind the glass of his apartment window, and with trembling hands, unfolded the paper. Sandra's handwriting was neat, careful, written with the deliberate hand of someone who knew every word would be remembered forever. Keanu, if you're reading this, it means I didn't have the courage to say it to your face. And I hate that. You've always deserved truth. But sometimes the truth is too big to fit inside a single conversation. He paused, already feeling the heaviness pool behind his eyes. He read on. I'm leaving because I'm scared. Not of you. Never of you. I'm scared of what I've hidden, of how it might change the way you look at me, of how it might trap you into carrying a weight that isn't yours to carry. I've been diagnosed, Keanu. Early stage, it's treatable. But the journey ahead, it's not one I want anyone to walk for me, not even you, especially not you. Because if you hold my hand through this, I'll never let go, and you've already given me more than I deserved. I won't let you give me your future, too. I love you, I think I've always loved you, but I never said it because I knew that once I did, I'd never be able to stop. And you deserve someone whole, someone who isn't broken inside. I'm not saying goodbye because I want to, I'm saying it because I don't know how to let you see me like this. Weak, fragile, dying or not, I don't want to be remembered that way. Please don't chase me. Let this be enough. Let this be my peace. Sandra. Keanu finished reading with the paper trembling in his hands. A single tear traced down his cheek. Not because she was ill, but because she still didn't understand. She had never been a burden. Not to him, not ever. She was his anchor, his constant. The one person who had seen every shade of his soul and never asked him to change. And now she was asking him to forget, to let go. He couldn't. He wouldn't. Not this time. And with that, he stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked toward the morning sun. The ocean between them. The wind pushed softly against Sandra's sweater as she stood at the shoreline, the edge of morning brushing the waves with silver. The Pacific was restless that day, its tides surging toward her like unspoken words rushing to the surface. She watched the horizon like someone waiting for an answer, not from the sky, not from the ocean, but from her own soul. Last night, she hadn't slept more than 2 hours. The hotel room, as luxurious as it was, felt like a prison cell carved out of memory. Her mind kept replaying Keanu's face when she handed him the letter. Not the confusion in his eyes, not even the sadness. It was the silent understanding, the way he didn't fight it, the way he respected her decision that broke her most. Because only someone who truly loved you could love you enough to let you go without a word. But now, standing here away from the lights and the walls and the noise of the industry that had defined her for decades, she wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe she hadn't been fair. Maybe she had made a decision for him, not with him. And that difference, however small, was eating her alive. Behind her, the wooden deck creaked softly, a footstep. Sandra turned slowly, expecting no one, maybe a staff member, maybe just the wind playing games again. But it was. Keanu stood there, dressed simply in a gray shirt and black jeans, no cameras, no entourage, no expressions rehearsed for the press. Just him, just the man who had read her letter and come anyway. For a second, neither spoke. She blinked, disbelieving. He didn't smile, he didn't cry. He just looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time all over again. And in that moment, the ocean stopped crashing, the world stopped spinning, and everything she thought she'd locked away behind the safety of that goodbye started to unravel. "Anu," she whispered, the name escaping her lips like it had been trapped in her chest for days. He didn't answer with words. He stepped closer, slowly, giving her space, always giving her space, until she didn't want it anymore. "You weren't supposed to come," she added, not as a protest, but as a broken truth. He stopped a few feet away and finally spoke, his voice calm, low, and heartbreakingly clear. "And you weren't supposed to face this alone." Sandra looked away, tears gathering. "You read it." "Every word," he said, "and I still came." She sat down on the edge of the bench facing the sea, her hands trembling in her lap. He followed, sitting beside her, not touching her, not asking questions, just being there. That had always been his gift presence, not the loud, overwhelming kind, but the sort that made you feel like you could breathe for the first time in weeks. She turned to him slowly. "You think I made the wrong choice, don't you?" "I think," he began, pausing to choose his words carefully, "that you were trying to protect me. But love doesn't need protection. It needs participation." She laughed, but it came out wet, shaky. "You always were the one with the quotes." He smiled faintly, but it didn't last. "Sandra, I don't care what the journey looks like. I care that I'm in it with you. If you're scared, I'll be scared with you. If you're tired, I'll carry the silence. But don't ever take away my choice to love you just because you think it's too much." Her breath caught. "I didn't want you to watch me fade. I'd rather watch you fight," he said, his voice firm now. "Even if it's messy. Even if it hurts. I'd rather be there for your worst days than be absent from your truth." For a long time, the only sound was the ocean again, but now it didn't feel hostile. It felt alive, like it was listening, holding them both inside its vast, breathing silence. Sandra finally turned to him fully, her hand reaching for his, unsure if she deserved his touch after pushing him away. But he took it instantly, with no hesitation, wrapping her fingers in his. "What if it doesn't go away?" she asked. "What if the treatments don't work?" Keanu leaned closer. "Then we fight harder. Or we fall together, but either way, you won't be alone." And for the first time since her diagnosis, Sandra allowed herself to cry without shame. She leaned into him, head on his shoulder, heart open again, not because everything would be okay, but because now she didn't have to pretend that it already was. Keanu didn't say anything more. He just held her, firm, still, safe. Back in the city, Alexandra stood near the editing bay of the studio, reviewing the footage from the tribute event. She paused the screen on a single frame, the moment when Sandra had turned her eyes toward Keanu and said nothing. She rewound it, watched it again. There was something in that silence that she couldn't shake, something universal, something that audiences wouldn't understand unless they knew the weight of it. It wasn't just entertainment, it was real. It was love breaking and mending at the same time. And she wondered what it would take for the world to see beyond the celebrity, beyond the press, and witness what she had seen in that hallway. Two souls aching to be known fully, and finally allowed to be. The studio team had asked her if the interview should be trimmed, if the awkward pause, the silence, should be removed to tighten the narrative. But Alexandra had said no. "That silence was the story," she told them. "Don't you dare cut it." And somewhere far from that studio, on a quiet beach beneath a softening sky, Sandra Bullock rested her head against Keanu Reeves' chest and felt the beat of a heart that wasn't afraid of her broken pieces. She knew there were still hard days ahead. Doctors, treatments, the unknown. But for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of facing them. Because now, she wasn't facing them alone. Her weakest moment, his strongest promise. The days that followed were quiet, not in a hollow or empty way, but in a healing one, like the world had slowed down just enough to let two tired hearts catch their breath. Sandra stayed in the beach house, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to live without a schedule, without camera calls, without makeup chairs and memorized lines. Keanu stayed, too, not as a guest, not as a caretaker, not even as a boyfriend. He stayed as something far more rare, a witness. A quiet, unwavering presence that neither pushed nor pulled, but existed like a steady light, illuminating the corners of her she had long since shut off. Every morning he brewed coffee before she woke. Every afternoon he walked with her along the edge of the sand, not talking much, not needing to. Every night they sat in the fading sun, and even though the sky turned gold and bled into deep twilight, he never asked the question hovering between them, what happens next? Because he knew she wasn't ready to answer, and he was willing to wait. But one morning the silence broke, Not with words, not with drama, but with pain. Sandra had woken up before the sun, her body aching in places she didn't expect, her stomach twisted in sharp waves of nausea, and her vision blurry from the medications she had started quietly. She hadn't told him. She didn't want to seem weak, but the body never lies. She made it halfway to the bathroom before collapsing, the tiled floor cold against her cheek, her fingers shaking as she tried to lift herself. Panic surged in her chest, not from the pain, but from the shame. Shame that he might find her like this, vulnerable, stripped of her strength, the version of herself she had fought so hard to hide from the world. And then she heard his footsteps. Soft, careful, but fast. "Sandra," his voice called out as the door opened. He found her curled against the floor, hair clinging to her damp forehead, a quiet moan escaping her lips as she tried to sit up. Keanu didn't gasp. He didn't freeze. He didn't say anything that made her feel smaller. He dropped to his knees and scooped her into his arms like she weighed nothing, like her pain was something he was made to carry. She tried to speak, "Don't, please," but he only shook his head gently. "Don't ask me to leave you like this." He placed her on the bed with incredible care, brushing the strands of hair from her face. He brought her water, adjusted her pillows, dimmed the lights, and pulled the blanket over her shoulders. When she turned her face away from him, tears slipping silently onto the pillow, he sat beside her and reached for her hand. "This is not weakness," he whispered. "This is strength, Sandra. Letting someone see you like this, letting someone stay, that's the bravest thing you've ever done." She broke then, not just her tears, but her silence, her walls, her defenses. "I didn't want you to see me like this," she sobbed, voice cracking under the weight of all she had tried to bear alone. "I thought if I kept it hidden, maybe I could control it. Maybe I could still be me." Keanu leaned in, forehead gently pressing against hers. "You are still you. Nothing, not this illness, not this moment, can take that away." She reached for him then, not just out of pain, but out of surrender. And for the first time since she had been diagnosed, she allowed herself to be held not as a patient, not as a burden, but as a woman who was tired and scared and deeply loved. They stayed like that for hours. No acting, no pretending, no distance, only truth. That evening, after she had finally fallen asleep in his arms, Keanu stepped out onto the deck, the sky thick with stars above. Alexandra called. She had been gently checking in since the event, careful not to overstep. Keanu answered with a soft voice, "She's resting." There was silence on the line, and then Alexandra asked, carefully, "Are you okay?" Keanu looked up at the stars, his thumb rubbing the edge of the phone as if it were the letter still in his pocket. "I'm not the one fighting for my life," he said, "but I'm right where I need to be." There was a pause before she whispered, "I hope she knows that." Keanu's voice broke slightly. "She does now." And after that call ended, he stayed outside for a long time, looking at the sky the way Sandra had looked at the ocean, searching for answers, or maybe just the strength to keep showing up without needing them. The next morning was gentler. Sandra woke to the smell of lavender and warm tea. On the nightstand was a note in Keanu's handwriting. "Gone to the store, you're not fighting this alone anymore." She smiled through the ache in her body and sat up slowly. She looked around the room. It wasn't a hospital. It wasn't a studio. It wasn't anything from her past life. It was just a room with light and windows and books and silence. A place of recovery. A place of truth. She walked slowly to the mirror, expecting to see someone diminished, frail, pale, defeated. But what stared back was something else. A woman in the beginning of her fight. A woman who had been seen at her worst and still held, still loved. Later that afternoon, when Keanu returned, he brought more than groceries. He brought a new idea. "Let's leave," he said. Sandra blinked. "Leave, we're already hiding out." "No," he said, smiling now. "I don't mean Malibu, I mean everything. Hollywood, the noise, the cameras. Let's disappear for a while, find somewhere real, somewhere quiet, where healing doesn't feel like hiding." She hesitated. "I have treatments." "I already called Dr. Patel," he said gently. "They have facilities in Vancouver, and she said it might actually be better for your mental health to be out of LA for a bit, somewhere with fresh air, somewhere you can walk without makeup and nobody stares." She stared at him. "You called my doctor." Keanu nodded. "You trusted me with your truth. Let me be worthy of it." She didn't speak for a long time, but when she finally did, her voice cracked with something deeper than gratitude. "Okay," she whispered. And just like that, a new chapter began. Not one of scripts or awards or premieres, but one of healing, one of love, one of staying through it all, where the world could follow. The air in Vancouver was different, not just colder or cleaner, but calmer, the kind of calm that whispered rather than roared. It greeted them without fanfare, without cameras, without headlines. And after years of red carpets and sleepless hotel suites, that absence of noise was a gift Sandra hadn't known she needed. The rented cabin sat at the edge of a quiet lake, nestled between evergreens and forgotten gravel roads. There were no neighbors in sight, no tourists, no eyes watching. The windows welcomed mist in the morning and golden light in the evenings. It wasn't luxury, but it was sanctuary, and that made all the difference. Keanu carried her bags inside while Sandra stood at the porch, letting the cold wind kiss her skin, the sound of birdsong threading through the trees like an invitation to begin again. Her body still hurt, and her energy was unpredictable, but here she could breathe without pretending. They didn't talk much those first few days. Words had their place, but silence, shared, intentional, sacred silence, became their new language. Keanu moved through the cabin with quiet ease, lighting the fireplace before the chill settled in, leaving warm notes by her tea, cutting firewood without a single complaint. He never hovered, never asked for updates, never pressured her into smiling. He just stayed, present, soft, steady. And slowly, Sandra began to soften too, not because the pain left her body, but because the fear that had curled around her heart like a fist had started to loosen its grip. One afternoon, as the rain tapped gently on the windows, she sat in the old wooden rocker by the fire, blanket draped over her knees, watching Keanu fix a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. It was so simple, so ordinary, and yet something inside her broke in the most beautiful way. For the first time in months, she laughed, a real, breathy, startled laugh. Keanu looked up, wiping his hands on a towel, his eyes lighting up like someone who had just seen the sun after weeks of rain. "That sound," he said, voice warm, "I missed it." She laughed again, hand covering her mouth as tears welled up unexpectedly. "It feels strange," she said, "to laugh without guilt." Keanu walked over and crouched beside her, taking her hand. "Then do it more. Let joy be part of the fight, too." And just like that, another layer of her fear peeled away. But healing wasn't linear. Some mornings her body rebelled, nausea stealing her appetite, fatigue anchoring her limbs. Other days her thoughts turned dark, haunted by questions she couldn't voice out loud. What if I don't survive this? What if this peace is only borrowed time? What if loving him now only makes the goodbye harder later? She kept these thoughts quiet at first, afraid that speaking them would make them real. But Keanu always noticed. He noticed when her smile didn't reach her eyes, when her hand trembled as she poured her tea, when she sat at the window too long without blinking. And he never forced her to explain. He simply showed up beside her with a book or a warm bowl of soup or just his silent presence. It was during one of those quiet windows, just after sunset, her head resting against his shoulder, that she finally said it. "I'm scared of dying." Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't respond with platitudes or false optimism. He just nodded slowly and replied, "Then let's make sure every moment until then feels like living." That night he made a list, not a bucket list, not some grand, cinematic chase after thrills, but a life list, simple, soul-filled things. Bake something together, watch the stars in complete silence, paint the walls of a room a color we've never tried, dance with no music, laugh until we forget why we started. He showed her the list at breakfast, scribbled in his messy handwriting on the back of a receipt. "We'll cross them off," he said, "one heartbeat at a time." Sandra stared at the paper, her fingers brushing the ink. "You made this for me?" "I made it for us," he said. "Because if we're walking this path, we're walking it together, and even if it ends, I want every step to matter." They started that afternoon. The baking was a disaster, flour everywhere, burned edges, laughter echoing off the cabin walls. But the joy was real. So was the frosting on Keanu's nose. She danced that night too, slowly, barefoot in his arms, with the fireplace as their spotlight and no music except the rhythm of two people daring to exist fully, even in uncertainty. But the most profound moment came days later, when Sandra asked him a question that caught them both off guard. "Why haven't you told anyone you're here?" Keanu looked up from the small book he was reading, brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "I mean your team, the press, the world. No one knows where you are. You've disappeared." He closed the book and leaned forward. "Because nothing out there matters right now. You matter." Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. "What if this ends badly?" "Then let it end in truth," he said. "Let it end in presence, not hiding." She nodded slowly, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. "You've always made me feel seen," she whispered. "And you've always made me feel needed," he replied. And with that, another wall crumbled. Another wound healed. And the world outside stayed quiet, Because sometimes the loudest moments of love happen in the stillest places. Cabins in the woods, morning coffee in silence, laughter between storms. The life they were building now wasn't made for headlines. It was made for forever, even if forever was short. The goodbye that changed everything. The first snowfall of winter arrived quietly, blanketing the Vancouver cabin in a soft, luminous white. It drifted past the windows like delicate feathers, settling on tree branches and the empty wooden swing that faced the lake. Sandra watched from inside, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, her breathing slow but steady. Her treatments had intensified over the weeks, and though the doctors were cautiously optimistic, the journey had begun to etch itself across her face in new ways. Her cheeks were thinner, her shoulders more fragile, but her eyes, those warm, deep eyes, held a strength that refused to dim. Frosty light spilled across the living room floor as Keanu entered with 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea, the warmth rising between them in soft tendrils. He placed one gently into her hands and sat close beside her, his presence no longer filling the room with quiet worry, but with a certainty she could lean on without fear. "Do you want to go outside?" he asked softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Sandra managed a smile. "The cold will knock me out in 2 minutes. Then we'll go for 90 seconds, he replied. And that was their life now, measured not in hours or days, but in moments, small ones they captured together like rare treasures. He draped her in his coat and guided her slowly onto the porch. The world was silent, the lake frozen, the horizon painted in delicate shades of morning rose. She breathed in the winter air, eyes drifting upward toward the falling snow with a calmness she hadn't felt in years. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He looked at her, not the snow. "Yes," he said, "it is." But beauty did not erase reality. And that reality arrived 3 days later, wrapped not in fear but in necessity. A sudden spike in her fever, a wave of dizziness so strong she could barely stand, a pressure in her chest that wouldn't ease. Keanu rushed her to the hospital, cradling her in his arms as though her body weighed no more than a memory. The cabin lights flickered behind them as they left, but the gravity of what was happening illuminated every mile of the drive. And even through her discomfort, Sandra noticed something unexpected. He wasn't panicking. His jaw was firm, his hands steady, his focus unwavering. He wasn't scared of losing her, he was determined not to let her fight alone. The hospital staff recognized them immediately, but something in Keanu's expression told them to treat her not as a star, but as a woman in need of quiet care. They placed her gently in a private room overlooking the snowy courtyard, monitors blinking softly around her. The room felt too white, too clean, too still, a contrast to the warm chaos of the cabin. Keanu sat at her bedside, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand as doctors moved in and out with reassuring words. "It's an episode, it happens sometimes," one said. "We just need to stabilize her." Stabilize, a word that felt both hopeful and terrifying. As night fell, Sandra's breathing steadied. Her eyes fluttered open, searching instinctively for him. He was there as always, she smiled faintly. "You didn't have to sit here all day." He leaned closer. "You're the reason I'm here, there is nowhere else." She squeezed his hand weakly and whispered, "I never thought someone would love me like this." He shook his head gently, emotion tightening his voice. "I don't love you because you're strong or because you're famous or because you're beautiful. I love you because you're you. Because you're the only person I've ever felt completely myself with. Because you're the home I didn't know I was missing." Her eyes filled, and for a long moment their silence said everything. Hours passed. The world outside the hospital window dimmed into night. Snow thickened, nurses swapped shifts. The beeping monitors grew steady and rhythmic. Exhaustion pulled at Sandra, and soon she drifted into a deep, fragile sleep. Keanu stayed awake beside her, his head bowed slightly, fingers entwined with hers. He whispered to her even though she couldn't hear. Words of hope, promises of tomorrow, secrets his heart had carried for years. It was nearly midnight when the door opened quietly. Alexandra stepped inside. Her eyes widened at the sight of Sandra sleeping, IV lines running to her arm, the soft glow of the cardiac monitor reflecting across her face. She had come to deliver documents, to check in, maybe even to say goodbye in her own way. But she did not expect to witness this. Keanu Reeves sitting in the darkness, still unshaken, his devotion to Sandra filling the room with something that resembled prayer more than companionship. "She didn't tell me it was this serious," Alexandra whispered, her voice trembling. Keanu didn't turn right away. When he finally lifted his head, he looked exhausted yet strangely peaceful. "She didn't tell anyone," he said. "She didn't want the world to pity her. She didn't want to be seen as broken." "And you," Alexandra stepped closer. You disappeared from everything, every interview, every project, the studio thought. I know what they thought, he interrupted gently. But none of it matters. This is where I belong. Alexandra watched him for a moment, her heart aching at the devotion she saw in him. It was rare, painfully rare, to witness love stripped of ego, stripped of conditions, stripped of expectation. She's lucky to have you, she murmured. He shook his head immediately. I'm the lucky one. A soft sound escaped Sandra, not words, just a fragile shift in her breathing. Keanu leaned toward her instantly, brushing his thumb against her knuckles. Alexandra stepped back, witnessing a scene she knew would never be captured by cameras or written into interviews, a moment that belonged only to them. Then Sandra's eyes fluttered open. For a split second, confusion crossed her face, until she saw both of them. Alex, she whispered, voice soft and fragile. Alexandra stepped forward, forcing a smile through her emotion. I came to see you, only if you want that. Sandra nodded weakly, her eyes glistening. Thank you. Keanu adjusted her pillow gently, helping her sit a little taller. Sandra looked from one face to the other and exhaled with slow acceptance. You both saw me leave that night, she said. You saw me break, and you saw me try to walk away from the one person who still believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Keanu spoke softly. You were scared. She turned to him, tears filling her lashes. I was scared you'd stay. I was scared you'd love me through it. I was scared of needing you. And now, he asked, voice barely above breath. Her lips trembled. Now I'm scared of losing you. He didn't hesitate. He stood, reached for her hand, and kissed her forehead with a tenderness that melted every remaining fear inside her. You're not losing me, he whispered. I'm not going anywhere, not now, not ever. Alexandra looked away, overwhelmed by the intimacy of the moment. But when she looked back, Sandra's hand had moved, slow but deliberate, resting against Keanu's cheek. I wanted to leave you with a letter, she said, but instead you gave me a life. Keanu shook his head, his voice breaking. No, you gave me one. She drew a shaky breath. Then stay with me through all of it, not because you pity me, but because you choose me. Keanu clasped both her hands in his, their foreheads touching in a quiet vow. I've always chosen you, he whispered. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, wrapping the world in white. Inside, the heart monitor beeped steadily, matching the rhythm of two souls that finally stopped running, from fear, from pain, from love. And as Alexandra quietly exited the room, tears she couldn't contain falling softly down her cheeks, she whispered to the empty hallway. They finally found each other,